let's start with an introduction and give you a little more taste of what my role is about. So, just to begin, I'm a military brat. I grew up in the Midwest. I um, started as a military brat, and then we became a single parent household. Eventually, we settled in a suburb of St. Louis, Missouri, the Show Me State, and that's where I thrived in high school as a top 5 student. I achieved my ultimate goals of wanting to be a cheerleader and going to college. I don't know why I had the goal of being a cheerleader, but that was really on top of my list, and when I made it, I was excited. But I decided to go to college because that was just something I wanted to do. Honestly, I wanted to get out of St. Louis and I wanted to get out of my house. So that was part of my goals, and that was something that those goals were things that I made pretty early in life. I went to college with the purposes of wanting to be challenged, to be a trailblazer, and to make money doing it. I didn't know people in my family that went to college, so I thought I was a first time college student, even though later I found out I had people that went to college. But I wanted to be that. Oh, great, she was a cheerleader too. I wanted to be that first of doing something. I wanted to make an impact in my life. So my mother was a nurse, and although that was cool, I decided no, I didn't want to be a nurse. I want to be a doctor. And so I started out in pre-med, but when chemistry too became just too much of a challenge, I switched to engineering. Like that was going to be easier, right? um, I worked very hard and struggled through the program, but I did end up earning a degree in industrial engineering, and I felt very proud to walk that stage, especially because I worked really hard to do it. And I felt alone through most of that time. So as you can see, I was very different in my class, but it is what it is, and I made it out. And I did note that during my studies, I realized I had a desire to change my community. And actually, my favorite class ended up being sociology. It was an elective I had to take, but that wasn't a clue to change my major for some reason. I think I was also just chasing money. So I was not excited about the field I was going into, but just really excited to be finished with school and graduating and moving on with life. It was difficult to find a relevant, desirable job when I graduated, but eventually I did, and I went to Lucent Technologies in Atlanta, Georgia. It was my first corporate job, and I was completely enjoying the job, my boss, and my coworkers. Very quickly, though, Lucent began experiencing change, and me and my cohort were laid off within 3 months. And believe it didn't stop there. Many of the coworkers I came to like and respect while I was there were also being laid off, despite having decades of time with the company. And they were anticipating retirement. I remember a few people had 40 years, had decades with the company, but they got laid off and weren't able to take advantage of those benefits simply because they were loyal to the company and they just knew things would turn around, and it just didn't happen. And let me go back one more bit. While I was in job search mode for my first corporate job, I temped and I worked pro bono with a startup, and that was my real first exposure to entrepreneurship and the realization that anyone can be an entrepreneur. If that guy can do it, anybody can do it. So the Lucent experience taught me very important lessons. Loyalty is important, but corporations won't necessarily share the same loyalty that you may share for them. So that's something to really consider just going forward and where you want to put your energy. Um, Working for someone else cannot possibly be better than working for myself. Like I said, I've worked very hard in different things, different places that I've been at, and there's just nothing like putting that amount of work doing something that would be better for me and not just for another person. And then if I'm going to give up so much time in my day, I might as well do it in something that I'm very passionate about. If I'm doing something that's just so time intensive, 12-hour days, time as well as the time that I put in over years of work, it might as well be something in that I'm passionate about and something that I own. So even despite that, those learnings and my experience at Lucent, I was fortunate to get another job pretty quickly and kept those lessons in the back of my mind. But for my next job transition, it took me to a crossroads, and I had to figure out what did I really want to do with my life. So I went back home to St. Louis. I had an aunt that was sick and she needed help, and I was one of the only people in our family that was of age to be able to help. So I went back home and was able to reminisce on some of the things I experienced in my neighborhood. I was able to go back to old stomping grounds and visit my old high school and just different things like that. And then I was also inspired. So seeing some of those things that frustrated me when I was younger, and it just reminded me, I was frustrated about this. Why is it still here? I also took the time to read the autobiography of Malcolm X. I'd never read it before, but this was a book that, I don't know, I'd heard a lot about, and ultimately after I finished reading it, I don't know that I got all that everybody else that's read it has gotten, but my biggest takeaway was this book took place 80 years prior um, to that time that I was reading the book. And a lot of the information was similar. He was describing his neighborhood when he was growing up, and it sounded just like the neighborhood I had. And that didn't make any sense, given that it had been 80 years in between. So first, I'd like to ask you, just to make this more interactive, what's a book that has given you some inspiration and made you say, why is life that way? From that, the inspiration and that reminiscing, I decided I wanted to be the change. That didn't make any sense to me, so I need to be the change. And I felt very inspired about what my next steps would be. So I ended up writing out a life mission. Decided I wanted to go to graduate school and decided to go to business school just because had an engineering background, and it just seemed right. I knew I wanted to go into entrepreneurship, and I felt like entrepreneurship would be the way that things would change. So I did that, and I've been blazing ever since as a business expert. I've had varied experiences as that. I have counseled hundreds of entrepreneurs to start and expand their companies with business consulting and business plan writing and financial packaging. I actually did some training there. I also took some time to start my own company and started a company where we provide children's programming at special events. So in the corner on the right, you'll see an event that we did at my alma mater. We have a reunion weekend every year, and I organized the children's programming for a few years. Also on the other end, I have a client that she wanted an adult birthday party, and she knew a lot of her friends had children, but she wanted those friends to come. So we set up in a separate space, and what she's showing off there is this colorized book that I made for the kids that had her face on it. So we just had a great time at that event. And so this was a good time for me to just get into the grid of what entrepreneurship really is. Even though I had my own consulting firm and I wrote these business plans for other people, this was a way, after especially becoming a mother and experiencing the pain of not being able to have fun with adults without worrying about what am I going to do with my children. That was my experience in doing that. And I still operate it on a part-time basis, but I still operate it. So to say that was a great experience, but the road has not always been smooth. I've experienced bumps and setbacks, but I have a deeper sense of satisfaction that my work makes a difference for others. I'm using my talent in a way that it was meant to be used, and I'm glorifying God accordingly.